Hi, I'm Dr. Chris Stevens, and this is the Psychology to Live By podcast. Welcome to Psychology to Live By. My guest today is Garrett Wood. Garrett is a national board certified health and wellness coach, certified clinical hypnotherapist, and executive function specialist. He's based in California and he runs Gnosis Therapy. And he specialises in helping high achieving, high masking professionals break free from burnout, chronic stress, and imposter syndrome. Along the way, helping them build sustainable success without sacrificing health, happiness, or relationships. He's got over 18 years' experience. He's got a deep understanding of the hidden toll of burnout, stress, and masking in high performance roles. And he says that this is partly because I've been there myself, which obviously I'm going to ask him about. He is skilled in specialised training in a very wide range of psychotherapeutic and somatic methodologies. And he employs that to deal with burnout and stress, relationship leadership coaching, executive wellbeing, career alignment, executive functioning, ADHD coaching, hypnotherapy and subconscious change coaching, and somatic regulation coaching. So it's a lot. And Garrett reached out to me after he listened to one of my podcasts on personality and developing character. I checked out his website, read the excellent case studies there, and I knew straight away we had a lot to talk about. Having coached and counselled many high-performing people who were suffering from burnout, perfectionism, and the imposter syndrome, I was drawn to Garrett's approach. Many of these people have experienced ineffective standard treatments and strategies, and I knew the real problems they had were deeper, more implicit. Generally, the symptoms were being treated, but not the real problem. So, I've been excited about this conversation, and with no further ado, I bring you Garrett Wood. All right, Garrett, welcome to Psychology to Live By.
How's it going? Thanks, Chris, for having me here. I'm excited to be here today with you.
Look, it's an absolute pleasure. I've just done an intro to you, an introduction, but it might be useful if we begin by just a brief outline of your background and what's led up to Gnosis Therapy.
Yeah, well before I've ever been a practitioner of any of the modalities, I've always been on the other side, the receiving side. And it's an interesting place to be because you get to see what works for you, what doesn't. And that doesn't mean it works for everybody. But it does give you an insight, that firsthand experience. And I think that's an extra benefit when you're using some of those tools and modalities later with others. But before I was even doing much of that, I was working pretty big organization with quite a different population, pretty high charging, overachieving kind of people. And we were trying to increase their health and well-being. And the staff that we were there and responsible for, we were a pretty high performance organization ourselves. So lots of P&Ls, lots of budgets and spreadsheets, and we were managing performance to the dollar and our interventions. And it was a really nice system because you could see, you would go and do some activity, some initiative, and then you'd be able to see it reflected on the numbers pretty quickly, sometimes to the hour, sometimes, you'd have to wait till the end of the quarter. Sometimes you have to wait for the year and see how it went. But it was really nice for me to be able to be in that environment and see the types of interventions you can make and then the results that would come from it. Now, every intervention you do doesn't always show up on the bottom line. Sometimes it shows up in mental, emotional situations with people that are on your team and on your staff. It shows up in their pain. It shows up in their symptomologies that they're experiencing, their frustrations at home that you may not even be aware of. But they're experiencing some of that at work. And unfortunately, we don't have a way of capturing a lot of those resources. And so when I was there, I was having my own experiences of burnout. But I looked around and everybody else seemed like they were doing well. And that was great and encouraging and at the same time discouraging because here I am with my own issues. And there was a colleague who'd been at the organization for 20 plus years. He was always top of the charts and he was looked up to and regarded really highly by most individuals. He was kind of the archetype that we all pointed to, like, oh, if he's here and he's doing it, then we all can. That was our hope or our belief anyway. And then he got let go pretty suddenly. No real word about it. But I was in a meeting 2 weeks later after that with his replacement, where they shared that he had decided to take his own life because of the intensity of that, where he'd been such a part of that organization for so long, given so much of himself to that institution, that without that title, without that position, he didn't know how much of was left for him.
Mm.
And that was kind of a big wake up call for me because here I am thinking I'm alone in this experience. And there's this archetype that we're all aspiring to be like. And here he is suffering on his own, unbeknownst to anybody. And then how quickly that organization moved on without him and how much he'd given and how much love's left for him.
Yeah.
It really contextualized a lot of the experiences I was going through personally at the time. And that's when I kind of really channeled in and focused my attention on what was this phenomenon, what burnout really is, what's going on behind the scenes. Because I do think the World Health Organization does a good job at like putting a title and a label on it and making it real for everybody so we can point to it. But I don't think we have enough depth of conversation to like really see the true impact that burnout has, the ripple effects of it.
Yeah. And obviously that guy was carrying, well, he's living a double life, right? So he's carrying this intense internal suffering, and on the surface, everything's fine, right? Fantastic. Now I understand that it's suicide is obviously such a terrible thing, but it can give us, like all adverse life effects, it can be turned to good. Like it can wake us up.
It can wake us up.
Yeah, and now I think, your motivation. So thank you for that. So you were working in the corporate world, and you must have then pivoted.
Absolutely. It wasn't too long after that I opened my own clinic. And some of the interventions and tools and resources I've been using were therapeutic prior to going into that. It was mostly somatic and manual therapy. So that was a lot of where we were doing the work. So some of Peter Levine's work, where mental emotional discomfort from painful past experiences showing up as very real physical symptoms that you go to a medical doctor, they do the imaging, they do the x-rays, and there's nothing there for them to cut or prescribe. So they kind of shrug their shoulders and push you out the door.
Yeah.
So that was kind of
maybe question the legitimacy of your reports of pain, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I actually had a chronic hip pain, which is what got me into that in the first place. And I had spent the night, Friday night, in an ER where that was exactly the insinuation after the palpatory examination on my groin. There's nothing here. What are you doing here on Friday night, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
okay. And then and gnosis therapy. I mean, one of my sort of passions is I did a master's in religious studies, but studying the nature of religion. So I'm very familiar with Gnosticism and the Gnostic Gospels and so on. But I'm just curious about the name of the therapeutic practice.
So I like names because they're symbols for things and they have different meanings for everybody, right? So gnosis rhymes with hypnosis. It's got a G on it. My name's Garrett, so we got some overlap there.
Yeah,
but then that feeling and the experience of knowing, the felt sense of belief of that fulfillment inside of yourself with that term of gnosis feels pretty hopeful, I guess, is what I would like people to experience after going through some of the work together.
Yeah, and I guess we'll get to that a little bit as well about different types of knowing. So there is a kind of, if you like, left hemisphere, very conscious, fact-based knowing, and then there's a more holistic felt sense. And I know that's where I think you're focusing your work, and that's where the problem resides for problems that aren't easily fixed by external interventions.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's not just a simple point to it. There it is. Okay, we're good. Right. It would be nice if it was that easy all the time.
Well, yeah, and sometimes it is, like you just say to a person, look, I think you're working too hard. Why don't you develop an exercise regime, get some good sleep, stop drinking so much alcohol, be nicer to your wife. And it works,
Absolutely.
but frequently, of course, and this is where we're going, to your focus on these really high performers who are masking this inner suffering, like that tragic story that you alluded to earlier. So can you just talk to me, a little bit about what you understand by burnout that's underlying high performance?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people here in the States, especially, and I'm sure it's in most Western cultures, there's this idea that success requires sacrifice, that the more you're willing to sacrifice, the more worthy of eventual success you'll get. It's kind of just like a myth, right? And maybe it's informed by like the warrior archetype, if we want to talk about that, where it's like, to achieve the glory, you have to put in if you're not bleeding for it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are seduced by that. And I think in really small doses, it really does work. If you're in a
Yeah.
physical competition and you're on mile 24 of a 26-mile marathon, yelling at yourself to push a little bit deeper will definitely probably get you those last 2 miles. But it didn't get you started on the couch to crossing that finish line. And if that's all you have there is that internal monologue of that voice, go do, be more, it's going to be a really challenging existence in the long run.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because, I mean, there is a sense in which, and it's probably a question of how much, that things that we have had to struggle for and we've achieved them fill us with pride and a sense of achievement. So I think that part is legitimate. But I know what you're getting at, I think I do anyway, and that is it's this sense in which the suffering becomes almost the measuring stick of the value of what I'm doing, and that's clearly wrong, because there's very very often times when things flow, and it's not only not suffering but actually quite joyful. Yeah. Okay. So what's burnout? There's an easy question.
What's burnout? The World Health Organization, they define it as a workplace phenomenon. And it's too much work, not enough resources. And there's a gap there between what's expected of you and what resources you have to accomplish that. And the longer you're there, maybe you'll start being a little bit cynical. You'll care less about the outcomes. And then there will be some health and well-being consequences to that.
Okay. So it's interesting, it's an interesting definition, isn't it? It's a quite external definition. But like, how does it actually show up? Like, how do people experience it? How would one of the listeners go, well, I think I'm burning out? Like, what would they be experiencing on the inside, as it were?
And so experiencing on the inside, we could talk about tired, fatigue, because there's tired, right? Not enough sleep. But then there's fatigue. There's, I got enough sleep and I still cannot just, if we're driving a car and you have an old stick shift, you just can't find the gear that you need to get to that speed, even though you're doing and it's not working.
Yeah.
That might be something that feels familiar to them. They might feel a little bit irritated and angry for no particular reason. Someone we drive a lot here, and there's a lot of people in California with a lot of ideas about how to drive. Some of them I agree with, some of them I don't, but everyone has they're entitled to their opinions. But the idea of them cutting you off, how much does that affect you normally, and how much does it affect you now? Is there a difference? That might be an indicator of how burned out you are. Your ability to handle and regulate some discomfort is kind of diminished. For me, it shows up when my dog's being a cute dog, but to me, it's not that cute that day.
Yeah.
It's still the dog. They're still doing all the same behaviors, but for me, it feels frustrating and irritating. That is not about my dog. They haven't changed at all. It's something that's going on in me, right?
Yeah. So, and this thing is sort of cumulative, right? Like it's it gets worse and worse. It takes less and less to set people off.
It's that vicious cycle, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I noticed, reading through the case studies on your website, which I really do recommend to people to read, there's a number of loops that you describe, where people start to maybe be like we're talking about now, but then just push right through it. And then I remember years ago I had a model, I called it the creative roller coaster. It was designed for, people in the creative industries who work to deadlines and they have to be creative, and there's a lot of procrastination there. And then the deadline's looming and the adrenaline and norepinephrine is rushed into the system, and they achieve this, creative outcome. And there's a very brief period of a high followed by a much longer and deeper period of a crash. And then unfortunately they've got overlapping deadline-driven projects, so they begin again and again and again, and the cortisol high high is not really the right word, is it? The cortisol distress almost, gets higher and the crash lower and the recovery longer. Yeah. So,
and the high that you mentioned, I think, isn't like a euphoric one, but it is like an anxious one. So I love the imagery of a roller coaster because, if you enjoy going on a roller coaster, it's exciting for you. You're anticipating it with excitement, or you're anticipating it with anxiety. If you're like me and you don't really enjoy that vestibular stuff too much, it overwhelms you.
Well, exactly.
Yeah, you're going to lose your lunch. Oh, that's not fun.
And I think, physiologically too, there's the adrenal high is actually quite pleasant. It's like you feel pumped, and that can be very useful. It's why we've got adrenaline.
Absolutely.
But when our adrenals deplete and the body releases the big guns, the corticosteroids, cortisol, it's an unpleasant high. It's highly distractible. Our startle reflex is very elevated. This is when I think this is what you're talking about here, where people, like, you're getting angry at your dog for being a dog.
You're wired and you're exhausted. And even when you know it's time to rest, you can't. You're still in it, right? You can't unplug. You can't turn it off.
And I'm sure, as we're talking, there's probably about 100% of our listeners who can identify with this. Because I think we do live in cultures that enculturate this, right? That as you said, there's myths, and we consume them. Which leads me to the question of what do you think is causing? Let's just say I don't want to say it's an epidemic, because everything these days is an epidemic, but there's plenty of this around. What do you think what's causing it? What are the drivers?
If I had to guess, and it would just be a guess, I do think that, and you might be able to speak better to this before. I grew up in an era before cell phones were ubiquitous. We used to have pagers, and we'd have pager codes, and you'd have to go home and get the phone and return the phone call.
Yeah.
But you'd have that 40 minutes, if you're out and about in the car and your pager goes off, and then you got to go home and pick up the phone call and then call. But right now, you're always on. You're ever present. And if you're a passionate, driven, caring person and you care about the work you're doing, and you want to see it do well, and you want to see the results of your effort pay off in some fashion, you're more than willing to pick up the phone and reach back in, even at your own detriment.
Yeah.
And if you're a high performer, you're probably really good at that. It's probably a skill you've developed for a long time.
Yeah.
And you've actually been really good at probably ignoring all those warning signs that our body gives us. And I would argue that that's probably what makes you intrinsically easier for you to be a high performer than someone else, where it might be harder or more impossible for them to ignore. And so then we put ourselves in harm's way over and over and over again. And it's so subtle. It's so discreet that you don't notice it until it's like, screaming at the door, banging real loud.
Yeah, and in terms of the old behaviorist psychology, it's rewarding, right? So it's you achieve success, you achieve praise, status, self-esteem, and so, well, that was good. I'll keep doing that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the part where, in the creativity piece, where they have this urgency, and then they get the reward, and then, I did it. Yay, that feels good. I like that feeling.
Yeah.
Why would I not do more of that? We're going back. That's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
And now this creative thing exists, and it didn't exist before, and I'm responsible for it. Those are all good things. The problem is, I think if there's something else going on where you don't actually get the reward emotionally.
Yeah.
You might get a title, you might get the achievement, you might get the bonus, you might get the accolades.
Yeah.
But if that doesn't resonate in here, we talked about the knowing. If you know on paper, it's good. That doesn't translate into feeling or being that sense of accomplishment.
Yes.
Oh, what do we do now? Do we go back and do even more? We must be doing not enough. We got to go back and answer more emails or whatever it may be, right?
Yeah. Sometimes in my less politic discussions with lawyers, I describe them as gold medalists in clutching defeat from the jaws of victory. And what I mean is they ought to be a lot happier, right? By any metric, they're super. I'm talking international top tier, head partners,
Yeah.
and very often they've got the suffering that is at the centre of your practice. There's this terrible gap between their external success. They've got everything, they've got the kids, the houses, the high status, but very often their experience when they do achieve yet another big transaction or a success in court or whatever it is, the reaction is more akin to relief rather than joy. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and there's this sort of private hell that they enter. Could you speak? Obviously, this is right at the heart, I think. Pun intended, of where you work with people. Can you just talk a little bit about what's happening psychologically, you think, and what's also happening physiologically with these people?
Yeah.
Big question.
I think, yeah, so there's a lot going on there, right?
Yeah,
If you have finally achieved the goal you set out for, but you don't get the reward for it, even if you get the accolades, like you
yeah,
mentioned, the gold medal winners, and they got the gold medal, but they never feel like they actually won the gold.
yeah.
Like they won it on a technicality, or
They were
that
lucky this time.
they got lucky this time, and like,
Yeah,
ooh, they fooled everybody one more round of this. How
yeah,
much longer can I keep this going for? If they only knew everything that it took for me to get here. And obviously, that's just a me problem. These other people don't have these issues. Um,
yes,
and so
yeah,
there's something going on there where they're not able to actually absorb or even resonate with any of those experiences of the joy or accomplishment or meaning in any meaningful way. Um, there's a way of being able to state it and understand it, but not feel it. And I do
yeah,
think sometimes when, if I have some Tylenol, I'm cutting down some ibuprofen, I'm cutting on some like body aches. They say that it makes it harder for you to display empathy when you're feeling less vulnerability to pain.
yeah.
I think maybe if you're less attuned to your own emotions and you expect suffering, you're kind of dampening down some of that sensitivity to be able to focus on whatever the task may be at hand.
Yeah,
Now, when the task at hand is to celebrate and feel those emotions, you may not actually have that emotional skill to be able to lean into some of those things and have them register.
that's
That
really
might be a
interesting.
play.
Could
Yeah,
be a play, and it could just be good old fashioned exhaustion. Like you talked about fatigue before. You know,
absolutely.
so
Yeah.
when you come down off the high, you're actually feeling how you actually are. Um,
Yeah. And then you
yeah.
also don't have that anxiety or excitement and all the physiology that comes with it of being lost in the task. And so
Yes.
now you're out of that feedback system, where you probably
Yeah.
get into a state of flow where you know what you need to do, you know what the next step
Yeah.
is, and you know how it works, and you're feeling that for,
I think that's right. Yeah, and so
now
that
we
so
remove
this
that.
and so the solution is move straight into another big challenge.
Though this is uncomfortable. So I liked it
Yeah.
better when I was struggling through it. That was actually more comfortable
Yeah.
for me. Here we go. Let's go right back in.
Yeah, and of course we see this pattern over and over, and and it's cumulative, and the body starts to pay the price.
Absolutely.
And what does it look like? And this again is going to be very useful for our audience. What's it like when the person's kind of getting to the sort of point of, I've really got a problem here. I can't cope anymore. What's happening inside a person? What's happening interpersonally? How do you recognize that?
I think people reach out for help when they know that they can't keep the facade up anymore,
Yeah,
that it's starting to show. I actually think it comes from probably an acute experience of shame where they're going through day to day with their colleagues, at home with their partners, with their friends.
yeah.
And all of a sudden, someone's, actually being empathetic to them, compassionate, and noticing, like, hey, you don't seem like you're doing okay.
How dare they?
And now they're like, oh no, they can see through it's transparent now, or I'm letting it
Yeah,
slip. Oh
yeah,
no, I can't keep this going any longer. People are going to find out. Uh-oh.
yeah,
Um, And then the feelings that come with shame are really challenging. Um, and so
Yeah,
if they can get through that, like a little cute bout, maybe they can ask for help and raise their hand and seek some support after that.
so interesting. Because again, like we've got to remember the context here. This person is typically very high achieving, held in great and high esteem relative to most people. They're extraordinary, but the emotion that you've identified, and I think it's right, is shame. And you think, why would a person like that feel shame, right?
Right.
And it's because shame is a extraordinarily painful emotion, and it relates to our value and the esteem with which we're held by those who matter to us, right?
Yeah.
And it's like being found out to be a liar, isn't it? Really, that you're a fake, a fraud,
Yeah.
imposter, all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we go into the modalities that you use with people, I think it might be useful to think, well, what do most people try, and more or less doesn't really get to the nub of the problem. What are some of the things that people do before they come to see you, as it were, if I can put it that way?
Yeah. Most people have taken a vacation. They've taken
Yeah,
those half Fridays at the office off.
yeah,
They spend it, laying in bed, not moving, or trying to do something physical that's supposed to be healthy for them, like, whatever cardiovascular activity is their
yeah,
choice. Mine was always running, but everyone's got their version of that.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And it hasn't worked. They've also done the like less healthy coping mechanisms, so that might be substances, that take the edge off a little bit,
yeah,
make the
yeah,
things fuzzy on the side.
yeah,
Kind of hold the intensity of some of those emotional reactions a little bit easier to let go of for them.
yeah,
And then I do think that if they've reached out for help through more productive measures, they've probably have sat down with executive coach, probably.
yeah,
They've probably seen someone at work that's a mentor or a friend that they've talked to about it.
yeah,
Um, and a lot of people have probably, by the time I've seen them, they've worked with a therapist for a few years about a lot of stuff going on in their life.
yeah.
Um, yeah, it and they're all good interventions, but for some reason, the selection bias that my practice has, it's not enough for them. It didn't quite sift through that string cheese barrier that they have set up to actually reach to what they needed it.
Yes. So, to come to the title of this particular podcast, it hasn't got to the problem under the problem, right? So
Yeah,
all of these modalities are valuable, as you say, but they're really treating symptoms. And, looking at a medical model, that's fine. You take Tylenol if you've got a headache, but if you're having continuous headaches, they're not the answer, right? It's like what's causing the headache, right?
yeah.
And
Yep.
so
You can only take so much Tylenol before that becomes its own problem with its own symptoms that you got.
that's right. And yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I had a case come across my desk yesterday of a senior person, in an organisation who colleagues rang me and they're worried about her. And, they were giving me as much details, and they're lovely, they're compassionate, and they're wanting to check with me, are they taking appropriate care of this person? They're very valued. Fits a lot of the parameters you've been talking about today, She's got this sort of delusional negative view of self that she's about to be turfed, about to be thrown out, that she's no good, she's a burden on everyone, looks in the mirror, thinks she's fat, she's not, and so on and so on. But one of the little features, or one of the things they told me was that she'd been seeing a psychologist for over 2 years. And she's on medication. But, I kind of think to myself, she's actually been getting worse. And it's not about me criticising my fellow professionals, but maybe it is because, like, what have you been doing? Like, clearly this person's actually getting worse, and we're not addressing what the cause is. And I'm certain, so I've agreed to see this woman, I'm certain that the issue is the problem under the problem, and it's got to do with issues of identity and self-esteem, shame, and that egoic struggle to avert some sort of social catastrophe, right? Yeah, I'm talking very generally there, but I'd be interested in your response to what I've just been talking about. Is that something you see? Have you got different language for it?
Maybe different language, maybe slightly, but similar patterns for sure. This idea of like what most people would call an overachiever, and that person feels like it's barely achieving. Um,
Yeah,
and they clearly don't feel like they're on solid footing in their achievements, that it's a very shaky ground that they're on. And every day it's a catastrophe just waiting for it to happen. And if they don't spend all of their time, attention, and energy, it'll all come crashing down like it's a house of cards.
yes,
And living in that state for a long time,
yeah, yeah,
oh, it's really challenging because I
yeah,
do think
yeah,
that if you hold a belief on some level, whatever level you hold that belief, that you're not enough, you're not worthy, you don't matter, um, any of those kind of core identities that people kind of seem to grow up with at a young age, and you've internalized it, you may not even be aware of it. But what I think the pattern is these
yeah,
people are achieving to go and collect evidence. You know, you're talking about lawyers, they're there to make a case
yeah,
against themselves, against that belief. No, no, no. Look, here's all this good evidence that I'm
yes,
actually am good enough. I am enough. I do matter. Look at all these things. And then the hard part is the way they've earned them aren't sustainable for them on a physiological level or a mental, emotional, or their life around them. And so it is a danger. It is a house of cards because you can't maintain that physiology for that long.
yeah.
It's going to happen sooner or later. And I think they inherently understand that. But telling them, hey, just don't do that. Get some
Yeah,
better sleep.
yeah, that's right. Think more positively.
Yeah, like, and I don't
Yeah,
believe that most therapists are saying think more positively in their
no,
sessions. That's not to say that, but it's something else that's really there at the core that needs to be addressed, that is really challenging to work with for a lot of people. And
yes,
I think a lot of people wouldn't even suspect that that person would have those types of beliefs, and they might not even suspect it themselves.
yeah. Now, one thing that struck me when I was, reading through your website was a kind of process or sequence that you follow when you work with people. Right. So
Mhm.
now we're sort of segueing to your approach, and if I can say the standard approach,
Yeah,
say cognitive behavioural therapeutic approach would be, well, we start with reason. We identify the dysfunctional thoughts. Yeah, I can see you laughing and nodding.
yeah,
And the theory is if become aware of our non-constructive, unrealistic, and destructive thoughts, and we can do a bit of wordsmithing,
yeah,
we can change those thoughts around. It's going to feed back into the system, and it's going to change the emotions, and then we'll be okay. Now, that's a bit of a caricature of cognitive behavioural therapy, and
sure.
there is many ways in which that can work and does work, and there's been plenty of empirical support for that. However, when a person's in such a parlous state physiologically, it can be very hard for them to reason in the way that a more cognitive approach is in treating people to reason. They are literally not capable of that kind of, and so you're reversing the polarity, I think, somewhat. Rather than going from reason to understanding to an emotional shift, you're going to start with regulating the physiology, relating then to what the feelings that are there, and then being able to move to reason. Have I got that right?
Yeah, you do a great job of sharing that. And I think we have a good reason for why we go for the reason first in the West. We have prioritized logic, reason, and willpower as the thing that separates us as the king animal, the animal above all
Yeah,
other animals. The most
yeah,
saintly or godly animal is our logic, reason, and willpower. And all those Western philosophers
Yeah.
truly have staked their entire contribution to humanity on that belief.
Yeah.
But now come along in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and now even with some of the neuroscience coming out, the role that emotions play as a key
Yeah.
component to be able to reason, that if we took out your ability to feel emotions, you wouldn't be able to reason effectively
Yes. You'd never make a
at all.
decision.
You couldn't. You'd just be in a
Yeah.
cycle of, I don't know. I don't know. There'd be no way to like stamp an exclamation point or a period at the end of a sentence. It would just be one stream of consciousness after another. But those emotions, they don't just happen out of nowhere. They're there for good reason too.
Yeah.
If we are in a negative physiological state, um, if we're stressed, we're grumpy, we're tired, and we've all experienced this. If you skip a meal because you're focused on something or you're far away from food and you start getting a little hungry, and then you're trying to do a cognitive task, your ability to do that cognitive task is not as good. If you're trying to do an emotional one, it's really not as good. We've all heard
Yeah.
that term, hangry, and it's a very real thing. Snickers knows. They have a whole commercial. You're not you when you're
Yeah.
hungry,
Yeah.
right? And that emotion of being hangry is very real, very normal. And
Yeah.
so if emotions are important for reason, but then emotions rely on having physiology and access to regulated state of physiology to have the full experience of emotions, but then we don't have access to that. Cognitive behavioral therapy is going to be a challenge to do in that state. You're not going to be able to evaluate the feeling of the truth of this in a way that actually resonates. You could do the math. These are
Yes.
smart, intelligent people that are linguistic. We're talking about lawyers here,
Yeah.
linguistically driven understanding of conceptual things and can do all the wordsmithing and implications of them. But to have that go from cerebral to like the body matrix to actually have that expression and felt sense of it, that
Yes.
gnosis, you can't do that if you're in that elevated physiology. It doesn't work. It just doesn't add up.
I think in psychologists have called this. There's a sort of a dilemma here. They've called it. It's got a fairly beige name, like they call it. We call it emotional reasoning, and it goes something like this: that if we have a belief and there's a very powerful emotion attached to that belief,
Yeah.
we're much more likely to believe in the truthfulness of the belief, in the factual nature of it. So the stronger the emotion, the more likely we are to believe even delusional or illogical beliefs.
Yep.
Right. So again, there's a reversing here that there is, and we know now. You mentioned neuroscience, of course. We know now that we process the world emotionally. About a half a second before we process it in the frontal lobes. So everything that gets to the frontal lobes, for conscious reflection, is already biased, right? And biased by the kind of implicit identity assumptions that you made reference to. I'm not good enough, or it's never enough, or I'm a fake, or I feel shamed about myself. I'm a burden, and as you say, that's not always available to a person's. It's not crystal clear in the mind that that's what's driving, right? But I'd be a rich man if I had $1 for every person who's told me, look, I know this is not right, but it feels that this is the reality.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know what I mean, right?
Yep.
So there's that disjunct between the cognitive understanding, the cerebral understanding, and the felt sense.
Absolutely.
And the felt sense wins every time.
Every time. And it has
Yeah.
to. I think that's a really strong evolutionary response to protect us.
Yeah.
Because we learn through experience primarily. We don't learn necessarily academically through school unless you enjoy the experience of school. But experience we learn through. And we have
that's
strong
interesting.
emotions about it. And we have really strong memories tied to it that influence our emotions. Nostalgia is a powerful thing. I don't know if McDonald's has good food or not, but I know that I like McDonald's. And then I go as an adult and try it, and I'm like, this is terrible. This is garbage in my mouth. But in my
Yes.
memory,
Yes.
oh, it's gorgeous. It's beautiful. It tastes so good. And then in reality, it tastes terrible. But that memory and that feeling of the nostalgia is so strong that I've found myself buying McDonald's multiple times and being like, just doesn't taste like it used to. They must have changed the ingredients. They must have done something. And I'm sure they have, but I don't think it was ever tasty. I think I was just a kid with a Happy Meal, with a little toy. And they knew
Exactly,
that.
and there was sugar and fat in it, and salt. The
Ketchup. That's
the
my
unha-
trick there.
yeah, the unholy triumvirate, that we have. So, so that your approach now, just to, how does it kind of differ then, especially for these cases where the traditional methods haven't worked? What is it you're trying to do? How do you conceptualize that?
Yeah. And so I think, this idea of like working the other way through. If it,
Yeah,
if we're starting A, B, C and we're not getting anywhere, well, let's try it the other way. Let's go C, B, A. Let's see if that works. Right. And so this is a very practical inverse relationship problem. Okay. So if we can get regulated first in our body in the moment and be able to be present, okay, what does that do for us now? How much more access does that provide? How many
yes,
more different emotions can we experience? And salient ones, important ones. And now that we have experience of those, okay, is that one thought or that one rule or that one behavior the only way to be that feels okay? Have I ever felt anything that felt different that might be applicable in this specific situation?
yeah,
Now we start getting a little bit more room to play with. Because I think a lot of times these are smart, driven, passionate, caring people. They know they need to sleep more. They
yeah.
know that
I
they need to
know.
take their POT days. Like there's no light bulb moment there for them. So why haven't they done it? It's like
Yeah,
that knot that's gone through the dryer one too many times and they're trying to wiggle it apart and they're just getting so frustrated they can't figure out where to start.
yeah,
And I do think it's got to start with that regulation piece. And if we can do that, it gives us enough room to start wiggling the rest that you can bring along that felt sense of knowing and belief to
yeah.
map over the things you know are true to where they actually feel true.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and hopefully we're going to have more conversations about this because it's a big topic. But
It's a
it's
big
a part
topic.
of it's a part of what's called state dependent cognition, right? So the idea
100%.
being that if you can shift a person's state, and there's many modalities that you practice, like hypnotherapy or somatic therapies or EMDR or
Yeah.
polyvagal, like there's many ways of approaching this.
Yeah.
But it reminds me very much of the old exposure hierarchies when you're dealing with panic disorders. The general drill is you teach people relaxation techniques, and then you develop a hierarchy of exposure. Say they're fearful of going outside, and the first thing on the ladder is imagine going outside.
Yeah.
Practice the relaxation technique and the anxiety drops, and now maybe the next thing is going to the front door. Practice, and gradually you're associating a different physiological state with the feared thing, right? And
Absolutely.
in many ways, I think all of these, more modern approaches are more sophisticated and I think in many ways more useful, but in that they are really allowing people to target these underlying implicit assumptions about the world and about self, but pairing it with deep states of calm or relaxation and so on. So, let's face it, it's just so much more pleasant for people if they come into your presence and, they don't have to do all this terribly hard work necessarily. It's like, let's go into a naturalistic trance. We will talk about that another time, I suspect, but it's just the idea of really relaxing, becoming absorbed, and quietening down your autonomic nervous system and what's not to like, right?
Hey, you want to relax and enjoy yourself a little bit more right here in this moment?
Yeah,
I mean, there's not a lot of people that say no to that, especially if they're in any various stage of burnout, right?
yeah. Though you might get a little bit of pushback from these really driven type A personality types who think they have to anything to be any good. This is where we started, that they have to be suffering, right? So there
Yeah.
may need to be a little bit of psychoeducation about why this might be useful before they're willing to give it a crack.
Absolutely. And we're talking about cognitive athletes, right? in the corporate world and that
Yeah.
setting, it's easy for them to understand why if someone goes and puts a lot of physiological effort into a gym lifting weights or trying to perform physically, and they're probably some athletic version of themselves too,
Yeah.
they understand that they do need to recover from that. Sometimes
Yeah.
that doesn't map over into their idea of cognition or creativity,
Yeah.
but it is apples to apples there. Like, hey, if we're operating at this, we do need to recover down here, just like you would in between
Yeah.
sets or bouts of exercise. Let's teach you how to do it quicker, faster, more efficiently. So
Yeah.
that way you're not stuck at it happening. Hopefully, you can actually be in control of it. And that piece, I think, resonates with people.
I think that's right. I've often used the metaphor of the elite athlete and
Yeah.
how they strategically manage their body, and they realise that if they don't do that, that they won't be able to maintain high performance. I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? I mean, but there's that mismatch with people who work in the cognitive realm that they just think they can do more and more and more. Okay, now time has been flowing by ridiculously quickly. I feel like that we've opened up a conversational portal, right? But my first task is to thank you so much for your time today. I think for the audience that's a really important conceptual shift in understanding that we can work in that other direction, that often we're not fully aware of why we recurrently go down the same path as destructive for us, but we feel compelled to. People, their motivations are good. They want to achieve, they want to cope, but their methods suck, right? And it could be a relief to say, oh, well, maybe there's another way. So I thank you for that. And if people want to find out more about you, where should they go? What are your social media handles? Just so people can access you.
Yeah, if they want to be real professional, they're more than willing to do that. They can follow me on LinkedIn, and that's Garrett Wood at Gnosis Therapy. The G is
Yep.
silent in there. So, and then
Yeah.
same thing. That's my website, Gnosis Therapy. You can read those case studies there on the blog,
Yeah.
or they can follow me on Instagram if they're on that social media world as
Fantastic.
well.
Same thing,
Yeah,
Gnosis Therapy.
Gnosis Therapy. Yep.
All right. So, Garrett, it's been an absolute pleasure. I knew it was going to be. And we'll wrap it up for there, but hopefully this will not be the last of our conversations.
Thanks for having me. It was so much fun to make some time to be here this evening with you.
Fantastic. All right. You've been listening to the Psychology to Live By podcast. If you like the podcast and want to know more, my website is www.drchris.life. There you'll find links to my various social media posts, a newsletter, and lots more. And share the podcast with people you like so they can like it too.